Colonel Jonathan Conricus is a former spokesperson for the IDF, now senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, good to have you back.
Good morning from Tel Aviv. Good night to you.
So we're 3 days in. Can you give us an assessment of where the war stands from Israel's perspective?
Yeah, so I think where we stand is roughly according to expectations in the sense of what Israel has done in terms of the objectives that have been struck and achieved, and in terms of what the Iranians have done. I'll say that I'm slightly surprised by Iran's relative inability to fire large volleys of missiles. We thought that there would be more. And also surprised by their lashing out against Gulf countries, which you just reported on. We thought that that would come a bit later. But what we're seeing is Iran taking the steps that we thought. Now confirmation that Hezbollah has decided to drag Lebanon into the fighting. And that's, of course, bad news for northern Israel, bad news for Lebanon. IDF will be, I think, very swift and powerful when it comes to meeting those threats against Hezbollah. But so far, I think a good, strong opening campaign by Israel. And now we understand that we have to settle in, we civilians and the security organizations have to settle in and create this battle tempo. Because this war is going to go on for a while, especially with the Iranians saying that they're not going to negotiate.
President Trump gave a time frame today that we hadn't heard before, that this could last 4 to 5 weeks, though at other times he said perhaps if he found a way to negotiations that it might last a few days. What is Israel's timeline for this war?
Yeah, I think it slightly differs from the American one because of how Israel views the situation with regards to the ultimate objective. The ultimate objective here isn't just to downgrade the regime, isn't just to get some political concession out of them. I think Israel, deep down, really wants to achieve meaningful long-term change and really get rid of this regime once and for all. And as such, I think that the perspective here is different, and Israel will try to achieve more, while the U.S., since it has, so to speak, less skin in the game, it's not U.S. civilians that are exposed to Iranian missiles as it is Israelis. Maybe there's more tolerance and more willingness to actually go for a deal if and when the new whoever person in charge or committee in Iran will make that smart move and actually stop producing missiles, stop with the nuclear program, and maybe stop funding terror organizations. But that isn't a fork in the road that we have encountered yet, because the Iranians are saying they're not going to negotiate, and I understand that so far there are no negotiations. But when we encounter it, it'll be interesting to see how Israel differs from the U.S. I think Israel wants to see this through all the way and to really make meaningful, long-term strategic changes to our security in the region.
But does Israel's desire for long-term change to the leadership in Iran require the Iranian people to, in effect, finish the job? I mean, you hear President Trump encouraging the people to rise up against the government. As you know, that's a dangerous gamble for the people of Iran, given that they paid in blood for protesting this government just a few weeks ago. Does Israel's plan for achieving that objective require popular uprising?
I think there's no other way. The future of Iran as a nation is something that only Iranians will really determine. There can be external influence, US, Israel, and others, but at the end of the day, the future of Iran is in the hands of Iranians. And we've seen that Iranians, even before Israel and the US struck the regime, they were aware of these threats, and they chose, out of their own conviction and their own belief and their own despair, to take to the streets and confront this oppressive regime, and they have been demanding freedom, calling for the death of the dictator. That has now happened, and calling for the removal of this regime and wanting their freedoms and wanting a different future. So I think, yes, the US and Israel have responded to that in a sense, And at the end of the day, we've seen in history, and we've seen it all over the world, only the people on the ground eventually are the ones who chart the path towards the future. Israel is providing external help, but at the end of the day, the Iranian people will do it. I think I have faith, based on my communications with Iranians inside Iran and outside Iran, of the intensity of the desire for the Iranian people to actually have a different future. And I think that if they're given the help, little bit of help they need, that can and probably will happen.
As you know, the U.S. lost 3 service members in Kuwait. Of course, Israelis have been killed since the start of this new war. And President Trump said in his comments today, well, I should say Sunday, yesterday, that the American public should expect more Americans to lose their lives in this war. Do Israeli leaders have a similar message for their own people?
Yeah, I think it's been kind of a mirror image here. And, you know, even if they haven't said it, unfortunately, Israelis are, this isn't our first rodeo. We've been here before. We've, had a lot of missiles fired at Israel over many years. Undoubtedly, Iranian missiles are bigger, more lethal, have tremendous yield and explosives. I saw the impact site in Beit Shemesh yesterday. Entire houses were just obliterated by the impact of one Iranian ballistic missile, and we had 9 Israeli civilians murdered there yesterday. And yes, Israelis anticipate that there will be additional casualties. But, what the Israelis are doing, seeking shelter, most people are disciplined. They rely on the fact that there's active air defense, the Iron Dome, not so much, but really the Arrow. And of course, that our pilots are flying 600, 700, 800 miles away and actively suppressing Iranian fire, which I should say, when we compare the current situation 2 days into the fighting to how the situation was last year in June 25, Operation Rising Lion, there were far more Iranian missiles fired at Israel per day than it is today. Every missile fired is, of course, a lethal threat to Israelis, but the situation today is better from a tactical perspective, and that is something, of course, that I think Israel will try to deepen and create more and more difficulties for the Iranians to fire missiles at Israel. But undoubtedly, Israelis know that there will be more casualties.
Yeah, I was there in the midst of one of those Iranian barrages. Jonathan Conricus in Tel Aviv, please stay safe, and thanks for joining.
Thank you, Jim.